an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magicians, Season 1, Episode 1, Unauthorized Magic. In this first episode, I have got to admit, you guys, I don't know about all this. I'm going to trust you, because I know a lot of you love this show, but this episode didn't make an awesome impression on me for a multitude of reasons. We'll see if it's able to recover. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Jessie for commissioning this episode. I believe that Jessie has commissioned the first, four. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's about it. So I'm going to have another recording on episode 2 next Wednesday, a week from today, which is the 19th. Then there will be one on the 25th and one on the 28th. So there's going to be pretty good coverage of this, for a few episodes. And I'm glad, because I know that a lot of times people will commission something and then be like, well, if you like it, I'll commission more. And I totally get why people do that. Don't get me wrong. Because sometimes you can tell right out of the gate, this is certainly not for me. But I'm glad that Jessie's commissioned a few, because if this were the only one, I don't know how I would feel about doing a second one when I was not a huge fan of this first one. And I really am saying this as someone who fully acknowledges that first episodes of anything are really, really tough. They are almost always a kind of pale attempt to get you acquainted with everybody really quickly. And so things can feel a little rushed or a little bit broad brush strokes or whatever. But it wasn't really so much the plot or the characters that really made me feel a little weird about things. It was some of the subject matter that they dealt with and how they dealt with it that I felt off about. So I'm going to go plot point. I'm going to try and follow through the actual narrative of the show before I get into the details of what I'm specifically talking about. But the episode starts off with this amazing view of New York in what probably looks to be like March if you grew up in the Northeast. That patches of snow in the shade where everything else is practically starting to bloom is a really March, April sort of vibe. And inevitably you start to be like, oh, spring is here. And then a fucking snowstorm shows up out of nowhere and just murders all of your hope and murders all of the flowers that started to bloom. And then you have to start over. And in this bleakness, this door from this building opens and it's looks like an access door, a utility area. And it flies open of its own accord. You can see all of this sunlight and green grass and birds singing. And this dude steps out and the door just closes behind him without him having to touch it. And he goes and sits down. And the woman who meets up with him at the park is the woman who played Roz on Game of Thrones. I saw her and I was like, where do I fucking know her from? And once I realized it, she looks different. I don't know if it's just that she's aged or if she got a little bit of work done, but she doesn't quite look the way that I remember. And she's put on a very different accent as well. I don't know if maybe she put on the accent for Game of Thrones and this is her actual accent, but whatever the case, she speaks very differently in this. So it took me a minute and then I realized and I was like, oh shit. And you know what? I'm glad that she's getting to do something that is not Game of Thrones, because she really was not done any type of service in that show. So good for her. And it turns out her name is Eliza, and the man she's sitting to talk with is Dean Fogg, who later on in the episode, has his eyes ripped out of his head. Spoiler alert, worst thing in the entire world. I hated it. Thanks for coming. So she tells him he's coming and we need to get these kids ready. They need a little something under their belts before he finds them. And then she puts a giant fucking moth on his newspaper. I would like all of you who have maybe not heard me talk about this to know, as far as I am concerned, moths are the worst invention of nature. I hate them so much. It's really difficult for me to like get it across to all of you how visceral my reaction is to seeing her put a moth on his fucking newspaper even though it's dead. I recoiled. And you know what kills me is they clearly made this kind of like oversized prop moth for the sake of this moment to really get us a visual of what this is with no, because if it were a regular sized, like the moths that we think of, which are about the size of a quarter, it wouldn't really have the same impact. But what fucks me up is that there are moths that size here in Texas, and I didn't know about it until I saw them bumping up against my fucking window. They're the size of hummingbirds. It's horrifying. And later on in the episode, when this fucking dude walks out, and he's basically made of moths, you know what? Perfect villain. As far as I'm concerned, you don't get scarier than a cloud of fucking moths. So, good job. I'm terrified and I hate it. I hate it so very much, you guys. I just have this like terrible fear of moths getting caught in my hair and winding up in my mouth. And you may think that's weird, but I have had moths bump up against my lips at least 3 times since I moved down here. If my mouth had been open, my worst fears would have actually happened. And I have no doubt that it's only a matter of time. It will happen. Eventually, I will have a moth in my mouth, and I will wind up in the fetal position, and somebody is going to have to get me a weed brownie and a glass of wine, because I will not be able to fix my brain for like an hour after that. So, I just need you all to know how much I hate moths, so that you understand that if I have what seems to be an overreaction, that's why. This is a particular thing of mine. I don't like insects in general, you know. I think many of us don't, right? They're small, they surprise you, they're scuttly and creepy. But moths are like, the thing that freaks me out about them is how erratic they are. And you can't predict where they're going to be. There's no way to kind of get out of their way because they don't know where they're fucking going. And the fact that they're drawn to light means that there's no way to get away from them if you're outside. Like, you need bug zappers and things. So anyway, I swear I'm done talking about moths, except that I'm not, because this will definitely come up again. But I just, I want to put it out there so that you guys all understand. This guy is obviously meant to be super creepy, but I just feel like the creepy factor was so off the charts for me in particular. And I'm sure if I read this, it would be bad enough, because this is based on a book series. But seeing it with the cloud of moths that it probably extends about 4 feet, 5, 6 feet in every direction. No thanks. No thanks. Okay, so then we go to the scene where we first meet Quentin Coldwater. And Quentin is at a inpatient facility for mental health. He sort of was apparently suffering from some really bad depression. And the woman that he's talking to is recommending that he continue his treatment, but he really wants out. And he tells her, it's not like you can keep me here, is it? Because I didn't threaten to hurt myself. I didn't threaten to hurt anybody else. So I feel like I'm done and I'm ready to move back out into the world with regular people. And we get to see a little bit of what that means for him. Now, this is one of those things that I'm sure if you were reading, this would probably work better because I feel like you could get a little bit more detail. But on the surface, this is one of those moments that for me does not ring true at all. So we get to see him at this party, and he is talking to a couple of girls about how it doesn't count as sleight of hand if you have to use CGI. You're just cheating, which hard agree. And then we see him talking about some other, like, he basically what they're trying to get across is that he's a huge nerd who has kind of obsessive tendencies about certain things. He doesn't really know how to, like, have a lighthearted conversation that's appropriate for a party without getting super intense about things, and that he is very interested in things that other people are not interested in. Now, I say that this is not ringing true for me because this sort of like, oh, that's right. He was talking about a Danish film that's dark, which I'm guessing he's talking about Let the Right One In. But see, this is the kind of thing that, for me, it's a little late. This sort of thing would have worked better if it were set in, like, 2000. But as of now, in the year of our Lord Beyonce 2019, nerds rule the world. I mean, fandoms and obsessive tendencies are what is keeping franchises in business. Like, this is just so mainstream at this point that to have this scene where he's like, everybody's so bored and like, I don't care about this. What are you even talking about? Like, maybe I have a skewed understanding of what this is like because all of my friends are enormous nerds as well. But it really has this, like, the tone that you're clearly supposed to get from this, especially based on what the dean says to him later, is that he is totally alone. There is nobody who's interested in the same things as him. Nobody ever will be. And he is just such a weird, obsessive nerd that it's impossible for him to relate to ordinary people. And I'm sorry, there are so many people out there like that. There is no way that he wouldn't meet somebody. Like, you know, his best friend, it turns out, has been on the same path as him, but he feels has kind of left that path once she met her boyfriend. She clearly takes offense to him saying that. We don't have enough information for me to determine whether he's right or not. But this, I feel like there might have been better ways for them to have written the script to really get across how particular he is, to make me understand more of why people, because when he just says the Danish version is way more dark, and I immediately know he's talking about Let the Right One In. This is not so obscure, you know? Like, so this is one of those things where the show feels like it was written by people who really don't know what it means to be alone and feel like you can't relate to people. Or these are people who fancied themselves as being misunderstood by everybody because they were interested in stuff nobody else was, when in fact they were in very good company and they were just kind of dickheads and didn't understand why nobody wanted to be their friend. And that's not related. That's just you. So I had a little bit of a hard time with this opening because it just felt like there's no way, especially at a college age party, that he's not running into a million people who are going to know what he's talking about and want to talk about it as well. So we go back and forth between this scene at this party and him talking to this woman who finally, like, we see that he's going to go to a interview for a graduate program at Yale. And he is taking this new medication. And I don't know if we ever actually see specifically what the meds are for. I think that we just get the vague amber bottle with a label on it, but there's not actually like a close up on whatever it is that he is taking, right? But it's like there is a moment a little bit later, and I am going to jump ahead here because he winds up kind of getting into a fight with his friend, Julia. Now, he's reading this book. Because at this point, he has decided to leave the party and hide in his room and read this fantasy book, Fillory and Further, Book 1. And there is a picture on the front of this, clear garden area with a clock, and we get a little taste of the story. It's this really intricately made clock with 2 ram's heads on the top, and these trio of kids that walk into the clock Narnia style, like they're going into the wardrobe, right? So there's this one kid who has a bit of melancholy, and he uses stories to escape. There's another kid who had to grow up a little too fast because he went to war and he is injured, but he follows. And then there is the sister, who is apparently the skeptic of the family, and she also goes. And the sister is the one that we wind up seeing a couple of times later on. Her name is Jane. And she's wearing a key around her neck, which I really particularly noticed, and I don't know if that means anything, but this, I will say, got me on board hard, because you all know how I feel about British children's literature. So this whole thing is completely in my wheelhouse. Like a group of siblings that are going on magical adventures without really probably leaving this huge, manor estate or something. Yes, 100%. So he's in his room reading this, and his friend comes in and is just kind of like, dude, what are you doing hanging out alone in here? There's a girl out there. And she says something like, that girl had a unicorn on her shirt. She's clearly into fantasy, and I just wanted to slap somebody. Again, maybe this would have worked better a decade ago or more. But at this point, a unicorn does not mean anything because they are everywhere. And that is hilarious to me. That she tries to say, that's a clear sign that you guys have something in common. I can only imagine what would have happened if he went up to her and was just like, so, you wearing a unicorn, you're clearly into fantasy. She'd probably just be like, that's what you got from this? Okay. Maybe she is into fantasy. I'm not even saying that's impossible, but it's just such a non-indicator to me that I was like, girl, what are you even talking about? And it felt to me like a real, a moment in the script that is meant to show us that she is not part of the world that he's part of. So that made it extra weird later on when we find out that she was actually into all of this stuff at one time as well. Because I feel like that she, more than anybody, should be aware that just wearing a unicorn t-shirt means nothing. It's just such a weird little moment that doesn't feel right. So they're laying there talking to each other. It's really clear that they're super, super close, not only because of how comfortable they are, with physical contact and it being totally non-sexual, but then her boyfriend comes in and he sees them laying in bed and she's kissing his cheek and he is so unthreatened. He makes a joke about it, but it's so obvious that he is not at all worried. And it just really hammers home how much of a brother-sister thing they have, that even other people on the outside who might be excused for being jealous are not jealous in any way. So I actually like that as a shorthand for letting us know just how long they've been friends, how many people know this. So the next day he's heading to his interview for the Yale grad program. And they get to this building. It's this really cool looking brownstone, and it has these intricate looking doors. And the moment I saw the design on the doors, it reminded me of the clock. And when we see the actual clock inside, I was not surprised. I won't say I was not surprised because, of course, I didn't think that the clock was going to be a real intangible object so soon. I figured we'd eventually see it, but that it would be at the school or something, basically on the other side of whatever veil there is. But he's so fascinated by this clock that's what I'm assuming he would think an exact model of the one from the story, that he doesn't notice the dude who is supposed to be interviewing him is sitting dead in the armchair behind them. And it turns out, we find out later, because I definitely suspected foul play, that the dude was a diabetic and he snuck a bunch of Oreos and wound up going into a diabetic coma and then dying. So that sucks. But as they're leaving, Julia holds out this file to him and tells him about how she found this with his name on it. And he is completely flabbergasted because it is called, or no, it's not Julia that hands it to him. I'm sorry. It's Eliza. But it is supposed to be the manuscript for book 6 of this series. And he is Fillory and Further book 6, The Magicians. And he is completely buying into this idea immediately that this is the 6th book that people have talked about that is not actually published and has been supposedly lost for this whole thing, this long time. 1952, I think he says, was when it was written. At this point, we get a weird moment from Julia where she gets really mad at him for being obsessed with these books. I don't understand what exactly it is that convinces her he is being so naive and foolish to believe this. She says something like, "You'll use anything to run away." And I just, bitch, he got a file with his name on it that if you just glance at it, certainly looks to be very old. The paper is like yellowing around the edges. It's handwritten. It is not something that you should just discount out of hand. And it's super weird that you're accusing him of running away when the dude who was supposed to interview him was fucking dead. What do you want him to do? It was just like this moment of totally unreasonable anger, and him finally like throwing it in her face that she used to be into this, but now she's not because of her boyfriend. It was just like this escalation that also felt wildly out of proportion to everything. I just don't understand the reaction of rage in the face of an actual tangible piece of evidence that he is holding. It's not like he went and sought this out. This was sitting there waiting for him and was handed to him by a police officer. Like, or was she supposed to be police? Maybe she was like a examiner. I don't know. But it's completely out of line, in my opinion, for her to flip out and attack him the way that she does when he's holding something in his hand that, I mean, she says something like, "Oh, what do you think it is? A very special project that the dead guy made up?" What? Why would you even think that, or think that's what he thinks? A project that the dead guy made up. It's written already and is dated. And what do you even, like, the whole conversation for me made no sense at all. And her jumping to this conclusion and biting his head off like this, and then him replying with being like, "Oh, you used to be into this until you met a boy." I'm like, oh, brother. So I don't know about all that. I was just like, the two of them getting into this fight just felt really artificial. And it felt extra pointless because later on, they wind up running into each other again at the academy when they're both taking this exam. And they completely leave behind this argument. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me, except to, I guess, make them each continue walking without the other so that they wind up here separately. But that doesn't feel necessary. So I just didn't understand the point of this unless it's like just to get across that he's always living in this like fantasy world, which I'm because of how out of line she seemed, I tend to assume that she's full of shit when she says that. If I'm supposed to take away that she's right, I did not. So we have the scene of him like losing one of the pages and chasing it down, and he winds up in this it looks like a community garden that's totally dead. You know, everything is gray and there's no leaves or life on any of it. And it continues to blow away, and he is chasing it. And all of a sudden he looks up and he is in this other very green, beautiful place. It's like he walked through a hedge kind of thing. And he is extremely startled by the whole thing. She is on an elevator, and when she gets off the elevator, she winds up in the building. Like, he's outside on the huge lawn in front of the building, but she is actually inside already when she gets off. So she wanders following these signs to this exam room, and he is greeted by this dude, what is his name? Elliot, right. Elliot, who is basically like British schoolboy, but updated fashion police style. Elliot has a lovely sense of style. He is wearing a pair of khakis, which I normally hate khakis, but he makes them work by wearing this awesome vest and brown tie with it. And he is laying on his back, casually smoking, waiting for him, and seems to be very sort of uninterested in explaining what's going on. This is all sort of humdrum routine shit for him, and he doesn't have a lot of patience with having to explain shit. And he's also sort of, what's the word I want? Disdainful. He gives Quentin this like once over as he walks away that really makes it feel like, you're not really what I was hoping for. Oh well. And I'm interested to find out like how many people he has had to bring inside and how they knew exactly which way he was going to be coming in from. But yeah, the whole thing is kind of amusing because it turns out that this is called Brakebills University, which I want to know where that name came from because it's so ordinary that it's got to be named after somebody, right? Like somebody's last name. But he says, you've been offered a preliminary exam for entry into the graduate program. So I like that also, that this is a graduate program as well, which implies that there are other undergraduate schools, and I would be interested in knowing about that also. And he asks Elliot, am I hallucinating? And Elliot says to him, if you were, how would asking me help? And I liked that moment a lot. Quentin just kind of like tilts his head like, well, you got a point. And then they continue on in. So they start the exam, and it's a written, which I did not expect. And it turns out that the questions change as they are looking at the page. I, again, want so much to know why it changes and if that means something. Like, because when it starts off, it looks like some kind of algebra equation or, you know, like there's like square root symbols and just long like numerations. And then when it transforms, it's hand signs. It looks almost like ESL, like, you know, the drawings of how to do, what do you call it? Sign language. But it's clearly like spells. And then it transforms again. How many windows are there in New York City? Is the question. And he looks at it and says, oh, yeah, I know that. I know that. And why is that the question? Like, is it supposed to be a test of whether or not you can see the real question underneath everything? Is that kind of, is there like a series of roadblocks sort of and obstacles that if you have magic, you can just get past without really having to think about it? Like, he looks over at the other guy sitting next to him, whom we wind up getting to know. And because I think what is his name? I think she calls him like, I'm trying to remember. It was the name of a guy from another show way back, and I remember thinking what a weird name it was at the time. But we'll get to that later. So he is answering this question, and as he answers it, when we look back at the page, it's turned back into these numbered questions, the what looked like algebra questions. And whatever he's writing is also an algebra question. or a response, I guess. So it transformed back, and it seems like he is able to respond in kind without maybe knowing that is what he's doing. So we have everybody handing in their tests, and some of them get these cards that they're told to take to the next level of examination. And this is when he runs into Jules, and they immediately make up, and they're talking about how weird this is and how they got there and the whole thing. So we go to her, and it turns out that she does not have what it takes, so they say. They feel like they brought her here because they believed that she possessed nascent abilities. And she's really excited about it and starts to say, I used to think that. And this dude interrupts and says, and perhaps you did at one time. Regrettably, you failed the written exam. I am here to prepare you to go home. And it's clear right here that he says, we'll provide an alibi for your missing time. And she says that test was crazy. Any sane person, all the questions kept changing. And he says, be that as it may. And she says, no, don't you want students who make actual inquiry instead of just accepting like sheep? And bites his head off a little bit. And he stops and looks at her and just sort of is like, girl, listen. And she asks, can I start over? I can't just go to Yale if I know this place exists, which, yeah, that's true. Like, of course you couldn't. What the fuck? And he tells her, it's fine. You won't know. I'm going to make sure that you don't. And gets up to prepare to take her memory. He's putting Purell on his hands, which I find super funny for some reason. And she, in response, as his back is turned, takes one of her rings off and gives herself this really deep cut vertically down her wrist, which I don't know if you all know this, but that shit could kill you. So maybe choose a different way to do this. That's all I'm saying. But it does not kill her. She pulls her sleeve down, and later on we find out that she totally remembers this. But it's not supposed to be that way. So the fact that she still remembers indicates something is going on that they are not prepared for, or that is part of the test in itself, which if it is, I don't like it. So then we have a scene after that where we go to Quentin's test, and he is in front of a panel, and it looks very much like if you guys have ever been on an audition for a school like that does performance stuff. Like I've auditioned for a couple of musical theater schools. It looks just like this. Big empty room, one long table on one side, a bunch of people watching you. And they tell him to do some magic, and he's got some card tricks, and he is thinking that this is what they want. But of course the dean is like, no, you're doing tricks. We want magic, real magic. And he's sort of trying to think about what that even means. Obviously very nervous, drops the cards, the whole thing. And the dean decides to push him emotionally to get him to inadvertently express his magic. It's a very, like, pushing Neville Longbottom out the window kind of situation where they just need to needle somebody in a way that feels kind of cruel in order to provoke this response. And as he screams at him, do some damn magic, Quentin's cards fly out of his hands and float in the air at first in this just sort of vague cloud. And as he concentrates, they take form in a sort of loop, and then eventually they come down and build a castle of their own accord. I would like to point out that the look of these cards floating around him is very reminiscent of a certain man who has moths all around him, and that there's a point at which the camera pans to the wall and you see just the shadow of the cards fluttering, and it looks like moths, and I feel like that's foreshadowing. I guess we'll see. So yeah, they go down and they build this like really intricate, cool like castle wall thing that has spinning sort of carousels on it. And the dean is very excited. And as Quentin stares at this, unbelieving that he did it, he passes out. And as he does this, we go into a scene that feels like he sort of, if this were, for example, the Young Wizards series, I would say that he wound up in Time Heart somehow, you know, except that this does not come with the comfy feelings of world peace and oneness with the universe that Time Heart comes with. And it is clearly the place from the book, because there is the tree with the clock embedded in it that was in the story. And as he's looking at it, he is about to reach out and touch it, which to a degree, I really understand the urge, but I am just such an anxious person that I just would never be touching shit. Like, I am not an adventurer. That's just me. You know, I am the person who gets dragged along, excuse me, unwillingly behind the person who actually, one could argue, has some nerve, or one could say is incredibly reckless and willing to risk things that maybe they shouldn't, you know, depending on your personality. So as he reaches out, Jane tells him, maybe you shouldn't touch that, because playing with time is very difficult magic. And she stands there, or she's sitting there, like up in a tree branch. And he immediately recognizes her as being from the books. And he's saying to her, like, well, she says, if you mess with it, it'll make it worse. And when he turns around, she's standing right behind him, and she says, and it won't stop him coming. And he says, who? And she says, the beast. You're in the school. He's going to find you because you're the one he wants. You have to learn, and then you have to get off the path. She says, you're on the garden path right now, and if you stay there, the beast will find you and kill everyone. So you need to get the fuck off. And when she says, or else it'll find you, there's a growling sound, and he turns, and this like bright blue moth heads right for his face. Again, such a visceral reaction, y'all. And he suddenly wakes up in his bed and has a moment of thinking, oh my God, was this all a dream? But when he moves aside the manuscript that's on his nightstand, the cards from the exam are sitting there on his nightstand, and he knows that it really happened. And you see this just breath of complete like relief. But we have the opposite across town, where Julia wakes up in bed with her man and looks down and sees this scar, this mark on her arm, and obviously remembers exactly what the fuck happened, and begins to Google Breaksville College and becomes pretty obsessed with finding this place again and getting back in to try another audition. And her boyfriend starts to get kind of freaked out and winds up calling Quentin, just being like, she is not herself. I don't know what's going on, but we need, like, you are supposed to be her friend and be there for her. This has been going on a couple days, and it's her fucking birthday, and it seems like you just forgot that. So FYI, I'm throwing a party, and you should come to that. So then we go to the introduction from the dean, who explains what's going on to Quentin. He says, a 3-year program, graduate level studies program begins immediately. Quentin asks, how did you find me? And he says, sense magic, these globes, it's not always right, so we test it. Which I appreciate, that this is a little bit more of a, excuse me, refined system that's explained a little bit more than, say, in Harry Potter, where it's just like, oh, we just know you can do magic and an owl appears. We never really do get an explanation on how they know. And I have always wanted to get more on that. So he asks about Julia, and this guy says that she didn't make the cut. And there's a sort of a weird expression on Quentin's face. Like, he doesn't seem as bummed about that as you would have thought. And later on, when he talks to her, and she is really resentful of the fact that she wasn't allowed in, he acts like basically she is just being petulant because she is always good at everything and has always managed to be at the top and so rarely fails that she just cannot handle the fact that she has failed and that this specifically is not for her. He says something like, you're good at lots of other things. You can do practically anything. It's just this one thing that you're not good at. And it's really kind of hysterically funny to me because if this were like, you know, she failed to get into an ordinary, say, philosophy program, okay, fine. But this is magic, and of course she's going to be absolutely crushed that she didn't get into this wildly fantastic program. Like, this is literally the stuff of fantasy novels the world over. I can't imagine how many hundreds of fantasy novels there are about a secret magical school for magical kids. Like, this is just a thing. And the idea that she should just get over it because she's good at fucking accounting or something, like, guy, come on. So what it really feels like to me is he is resentful of the fact that she has been so good at so many things and is kind of secretly enjoying the fact that he is able to do something that she can't do. And probably it's sweetened by the fact that he has been so obsessed with fantasy and now it has turned out to be something that's actually a reality. And he's been teased and he was basically yelled at by her for his interest just a day ago. And now he gets to be like, oh, suddenly you want to be a part of this. So there's a really like personal element to this that feels like, you know, he has like half of a good argument, but there is too much baggage between the two of them for them to be having this conversation and for it to go the way that either of them wants it to go. So this is when we go to the the sort of orientation that he gets with Elliot and this girl, Margot. He meets his roommate real quick. Penny. William Penny is what he's listed as here. William Penny Adioti. I didn't feel like she called him Penny. I thought she called him something else. But they're sort of antagonistic to each other right away. He comes in and is just like, oh, I guess we're... And Penny says to him, hey, roomie, and just stands there and sort of stares him down. And then when Quentin like goes off to the side and is looking for stuff, he says, I had this thing right here. It was, it said, Fillory and Further, Book 6. And he starts to say, like, have you seen it? And Penny immediately is like, so what, you think I stole it? Some dumbass kid's book? Why do you have all that nerd boy dragon porn shit anyway? Are you 12? Again, what the fuck? Why is everybody in this story acting like a bunch of jocks who are picking on the nerd guy in an 80s movie? It's real weird, y'all. And especially this dude who's got a fucking like snake tattoo on his arm. And he's wearing like 4 scarves and a fucking vest instead of a shirt. Guy, you don't get to be judgmental about somebody being into fantasy shit when you're walking around looking like you just stepped out of a fucking fantasy novel yourself. Like, what are you even talking about? A fucking armful of bracelets and bangles and shit. So, weirdly confrontational for absolutely no reason kind of moment. And this is when Elliot comes in with Margot. Margot is wearing a kind of a weird but kind of an awesome outfit. It's this pair of shorts that she has over a pair of tights that have that like fake thigh high thing. and a peplum top. It's a weird outfit, but I actually really like it. And she says, "Hi, I'm Margot," in this way that's like, "What's up, cute boy?" But then she says he's not that cute, but then she smiles at him as if she's like completely lying to him. And Elliot explains that you get sorted into houses if you show a certain amount of talent. But Margot adds, or you flunk out, in which case bye-bye, but you won't care because you won't remember. And he's obviously very startled at the idea that he could potentially lose his spot at this school. So they walk through, and it's a very like Mean Girls moment, or even Clueless moment, of like her introducing the different cliques, except that these are the different houses that you get sorted into. So there are physical kids that can do telekinesis and move shit. As he says, most can fly. Also, magnificent partiers. Do not come by our house if you have anything important to do next morning. Then we go to illusions. And he says, illusions, healing, nature, which I find interesting that is tied in, like illusions and healing are tied in with one another. I'm wondering what that is about, where that theory comes from. And then there is, what's the final one? Oh, the psychics. And there's these two girls that are facing each other, and they're like wearing these goth outfits with their hair intricately braided and whatnot. And they're staring at each other. And he says, you know what they are? Losers. And they stop and look at him and say, okay, we heard that. Eat shit, Elliot. And then they pass this couple of kids that are not looking up at anybody, not talking, not touching, not doing any magic. And they look like they have been basically robbed of any sense of like consciousness. They look like zombies. And Elliot explains that they are from a class of kids that started off with 20 and wound up with 4. The third year class. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows what happened. Quentin says they're just gone. And Margot says, rumor has it they were killed. And Elliot kind of cuts in and says, or flunked, or got bored, or died 16 perfectly natural deaths, whatever. And then tells Quentin, just so you know, magic's fucking dangerous. Like, that's part of the waiver that you signed. There is no guarantee that you are not going to get really hurt from doing this. So keep that in mind, because it is something that everybody here sort of seems to act like isn't really a reality. And Margot then says, so stay on the garden path, kid. And he turns and looks at her and is like, wait, what did you just say? Holy shit. And it's obvious that that is like a saying that is used at this school. But whatever he was told is directing him to break tradition, go against the rules, do something that is eventually going to get him removed from the school. But he loves it here so much and feels like he belongs for the very first time that the idea of ruining this for himself is unthinkable. And that makes total sense. So then we go to what is a sort of like a transfiguration class. And we meet Alice Quinn for the first time. And there is a ball of what looks like plain glass, like a marble. And she does something that turns it into a pony that's like made of glass and running around. And everybody is very impressed, except for this one girl, Katie, who winds up hooking up with Penny. And Katie is just kind of making fun of her the whole time. And continues to make fun of her later, even after this girl has proven that she is really able to do some shit. So we go from this to the scene where she hooks up with Penny, and they're like floating in the air as they're having sex, which I found really funny. And all of the stuff in the room around them begins to float as well, like pens and keys and things. So, you know, they are being set up as this couple, and I'm going to be interested to see how this winds up turning out. Quentin approaches Alice and tries to sort of like talk to her and get her to understand how alone he has felt and how worried he is about losing his place here, and that she really obviously knows what she's doing, and that she's hoping she can, or he's hoping she can help him, but she blows him off completely and is just basically like, hey, I am not here for you. I don't care if you're going to be doing okay. Bye. And cuts off the conversation. This is when he gets the phone call from Julia's boyfriend, and he goes to the party and then finds her sitting outside, and she straight up asks him about break bills. And he is obviously supposed to be like, what do you mean? What's that? But she says, if you tell me what is break bills, I will fucking stab you. I remember, and I know I'm not supposed to, but I do. And this is the conversation where he just is like, maybe this isn't for you. It's fine if it's not. Like, not necessarily everything is for everyone, which again, sounds logical, but really in context is not. So here comes the scene that I, as I'm sure many of you probably saw coming, had a fucking problem with. Julia is in the bathroom, and she is really upset and disappointed at the way this conversation went. And she's standing there looking in the mirror, and one of the buttons on her button-up shirt rips off, and the button goes down the drain. And then another one, and then another one. And she's looking down, and all of a sudden, the shirt rips off of her body, gets tangled around her wrists, and yanks her up into the air. And she is dangling a couple of feet off the ground. Then gets pulled backward, and her shirt basically ties her to the radiator. So she's sitting there, helpless, half-stripped, on the ground, as this dude that she talked to at the bar very briefly comes in and creepily strokes her face and her lip, and then says, how does it feel to know that I can do anything I want to you? And at that moment, the electricity that she tried to show Quentin outside that didn't really completely materialize crackles, releases her from her shirt being tied, and then shoots out of her hands in what looks like flares, like the kind of things, road flares that you would light. And the dude smiles at her and says, awesome. And does something to dissipate the magic so that it goes away. And says, I knew it. And she says, what the hell was that? Are you some kind of crazy psycho rapist? And he says, no, I would never. I swear. Okay. I just needed to see if I was right. Listen. No. You don't get to do this, show. I don't know you that well. We're not friends like this. You don't get to start off with mimicking a sexual assault in a bathroom at a club, which is insanely common, by the way, and then be like, oh, we were just testing you to see if you had magic. Fuck you. No, absolutely fucking not. And I know that this guy is probably a bad dude because he says something like, oh, you think the school's the only one who keeps tabs? We do too. And she's like, who's we? And then he leads her away. So, okay, I understand that, what one could say is, well, he represents the bad side. So of course they do something that's bad and fucked up. There are so many other ways that you could have something that's bad and fucked up that isn't sexual fucking assault. I am super disgusted by this, guys. It's just so unnecessary. So wildly unnecessary. And for him to react, what? How could you think this of me? Because you stripped her and tied her to a fucking radiator, you shitbag. It's just, I hate this shit. I hate it. I hate it so much. And it just does not need to be there. And why would you do this? There are 1,000 ways to get your point across without it being this, and the additional layer of the fact that she is a hot young woman. So there's a real voyeuristic, creepy sort of aspect to this where it's like, we're doing this, but we're also titillating you with it. Get the fuck out of it. No. Mm-mm. So this pissed me off hard, guys. And I kind of breezed past this because I was really thinking about this and talking about this with you. But another thing that I had mentioned that I was bothered by, that I kind of meant to come back to, was the conversation that Quentin has with the dean. Because the dean says something like, you're not depressed, you're alone. Basically acting like the depression that you thought you were experiencing is just loneliness. Which I'm like, there's a sort of implication here. He says, like, if you stay here and things work out, you aren't going to need your meds anymore. I don't really love this, like, equivocation of mental health and, oh, you just couldn't fit in, but once you find your perfect place in the world, that's magically going to go away and you'll be able to stop taking any sort of medication that you thought you needed. I understand that maybe that is supposed to be like a specific to Quentin sort of issue, but it really feels like it's dismissing mental health in a way that's sort of like implying that getting off your meds is like a goal, that if you are on them, all you're doing is trying to find a way to get off them. And being on mental health medication is not a bad thing, guys. It's totally necessary because many people's brains do not produce the chemicals that other people's brains do, and they need help. And it's just, there's something about the whole tone of this and the implication that if he manages to like really find a place to fit in, he'll be able to leave all of that behind. I mean, the fact that this dean brings it up at all is kind of not okay. You haven't been depressed, you've been alone, and you are not crazy, you're angry. And you are correct, everyone medicates out there. But here, we hope you won't need to. I don't like that. There's a sort of like judgment associated with that. We hope you won't need to. If you succeed in this program that we have set up, you won't need your meds. And if you do need your meds, then that means you're probably not doing it right. I just really, it smacks of that sort of like baby boomer meme thing where it's like, you don't need something that rattles in a pill bottle. You need sneakers and fresh air, you know, that kind of thing where it's like, no, you can have a chemical imbalance in your brain that you need medication for. That doesn't make you, quote, crazy. That doesn't mean that you are somehow failing. That means that you have found a problem and you are fucking remedying it. It's fine. I don't know. So I didn't really like the fact that the moment this dude says this, he just takes this medication that he has been given by a professional who has been interviewing him for a while and just puts him down and gives him up right there and then. I feel like that just sends such a bad message, you know, that I don't know. So those were the two main things that I just had a huge problem with this episode. And I'm hoping that eventually they either like walk this back or acknowledge how not great that was or something. And we have another moment of him getting back into this other place and Jane being there. And there is what looks to be like a gravestone that says Rupert Chatwin or Chatwood or something. Chatwin. And there's a light glowing in it. And he asks her, what is this? Because it's a symbol that he saw Alice drawing. And Jane says, why don't you fucking find out? And grabs his hand and presses it against it. And he wakes up in the library and he's got it on his hand. So he goes to her and is like, what the fuck is this? And it leads to this weird sort of ritual that includes, as it turns out, Penny and Katie as well, even though Katie is not really interested in doing this. And it seems like the ritual does not actually work the way that it is supposed to. Whatever this is, though, it's really clear that Alice knows more than she's telling anybody. And Alice is not here because she's that interested in magic. She is here because she lost her brother who was attending this school, and nobody has told her what fucking happened. So she's here to get some goddamn answers, even though nobody seems willing to do that voluntarily. And then we get to the final moments in which the mirror fogs up here. So it seems like whatever ritual they did, either it worked in a way that they didn't mean, or the ritual didn't work, but somebody is watching them for some reason. And when we go to this class, we have this horrifying scene with the Mothman, as I will call him for right now. Everything freezes, and the dean sees that his watch is starting to stutter, which is apparently a signal that this guy is coming. He knows exactly what this means, and starts sprinting for the classroom specifically that Quentin is in. So it seems like this dean is aware also that this guy is going to be going after this classroom, and probably Quentin specifically. This Mothman strolls on through, breaks the neck of the poor teacher who is sharing everything with them, and then when the dean walks in, he goes up to him and pulls his eyes out of his head, puts them on the table, and draws a little smile face underneath it with blood. It's the worst thing in the world. And what kills me about this is that everybody is in this class, they can't move anything but their eyes. They can look around. They can watch part of what's going on here. But they can't actually move and help the poor dean. So I don't know if we find out for sure that the dean died. I think he does, right? Because I think this guy cracks his neck as well. But it feels to me, yeah, because he basically chest butts him, and the dean goes down. And I wonder if he absorbed something from him by doing that. But it feels like the show, with this guy being in this suit, is sort of trying to imply that Mothman is the guy that is with Julia. I don't think that's true. In fact, there's part of me that, I don't know that we've necessarily even met this guy, or maybe this guy is just a representative, or maybe, I don't know. But maybe he is. Maybe he is the Mothman, and she's just already been taken by him, which would suck. Bad luck, Julia. And the episode ends with him bent in front of Quentin, and he has his hand up like he's about to pull his eyes out or do something. And that's where it ends, and I am dying to know what happens, because I can't... Everybody's saying he's after you, and I have to imagine it's not to kill him. It has, or maybe it is, but it feels like he's there to take something from him. So, I guess we'll find out. Okay, so that's the end of the episode. I'm a little over time, forgive me. And thank you again very much to Jessie for commissioning this. I hope that I haven't angered you all by having the problems that I did with this, but I hope that you get where I'm coming from on that. And there have been plenty of things that have problematic elements that I have been able to get past, or that have sort of recovered from them and corrected themselves. We'll see if this manages to do that. But it feels like it feels really clear to me, and I may be wrong about this, that this has been written by men. And I would be interested to find out if there were women involved in the writing, because if so, that might give me some hope that things will be a little bit better going forward. But as of right now, this felt a little bit tone deaf to some things. So we'll see. All right, so that's it. I think there were people in the chat here, but nobody was commenting at all. So I didn't get a single interaction. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the coverage. And if you are able to come to the next ones, like I said, 11 a.m. on the 19th, and then 11 on the 25th, and 11 on the 28th. So mark those in your calendars if you want to hang out with me while I talk about the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th episodes. All right, guys. Thanks again, Jessie. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.